Welcome back, everyone. Pal Ponder on weather here. Yet we have another active day for severe weather ahead, and unfortunately, it looks to continue to remain active even well into next week. So we're going to expand the view this morning on the satellite view. Take a look at the big picture because it is actually going into hurricane season. In fact, the National Weather Service did have a complex they did highlight across this region. And if it does come to fruition, it has very small chance it will be continue to shift safely out into the open waters. But it's pretty clear skies across the Caribbean right now. Nothing terribly too concerned about. And then all these systems out here are continued westbound out into the open waters of the Pacific. But here's the leading edge of the convective complex this morning. Now it's highlighted across Indiana as well as Illinois, back into Kentucky, getting into Tennessee. That was after yesterday, where those areas blew up big time across Texas and Oklahoma, back into Kansas, back into Missouri, as well as into Arkansas. In fact, let's take a look at some of the preliminary storm reports. Yes, this is very preliminary. The National Weather Service will still be out doing surveys for many days to come. But right now, very active day on the filter reports. In fact, we had 25 tornado reports so far. Most of them were over Texas, back into Oklahoma, as well as into Kansas, getting into Arkansas, as well as into Missouri. Yes, we had a pretty big tornado unfold last night across Valley View, Texas. And unfortunately, we are hearing 7 fatalities that came out of that. And we also heard about 3 fatalities in Arkansas so far. So it was a nasty day, folks. Very preliminary, a lot of extensive damage. But that's the same complex that's continued to move eastbound. And now it's going to be highlighted across those areas into Illinois. So right now we have the Storm Prediction Center that does in fact highlight that area where that low pressure center is. We already do have tornado watches in place for many of these areas, but nonetheless, that it upgraded enhanced risk for Illinois, portions of Missouri, back into Indiana, getting into Kentucky, as well as into Western Tennessee. But yes, that could shift as far north as areas shifting into Michigan and as far south into Arkansas again, back into areas, at least the northern areas of Mississippi and Alabama and heading into Georgia. But yes, one of the main concerns again will be some tornadoes. In fact, some strong tornadoes. In fact, they do have a 10% hatched risk of some of those EF2 type varieties, kind of like what we saw yesterday, unfortunately, could be impacting areas of Missouri again today, back into Illinois, as well as into Indiana, as well as getting into Kentucky, back into Western Tennessee, those areas coming out of Arkansas again, and well into Missouri. So definitely be on high alert. They actually have a lot of shear coming in at the lower levels. So yes, this atmosphere is going to be rotating again with that active low-level jet still cranking in. I think there's going to be 2 waves again. So you're getting the morning complex right now this morning, and then you'll have a secondary complex that comes in later this afternoon into the evening time frame. So if you look at the map of what we're talking about here, we already see extensive tree damage with a lot of wind reports of 50, 60, some of upwards to 70 miles an hour. Some flash flood warnings already inundating these areas. But there's the tornado watch that goes on for at least a couple more hours that does include Clarksville, back into the Nashville region, into Murfreesboro, all the way into Knoxville, swinging as far north as into Lexington, of this first initial convective complex that's not severe up there heading towards Indianapolis and Bloomington, but starts to turn severe along this line into Louisville and fishtailing further south. And some of these could be some isolated spin up tornadoes within the next couple hours. And yet we have another convective complex that will be training behind that one. So here's the new one. This is about 7, 8 o'clock tonight. There's the leading edge of the complex you're dealing with right now. Some of those going to be higher winds of producing some 60, maybe even 70 mile per hour wind gust. And then we have an evening threat really starting to come to fruition across those areas into southern Illinois, back into central and southern Indiana, as well as into Kentucky. That could pose their own severe storms and extend into a flash flooding threat getting into the evening time frame. So right now, the Weather Prediction Center does in fact highlight that elevated moderate risk for excessive rainfall with that convective banding is going to kind of train over the same areas. So if you live within the Kentucky region, back into those areas of southern Illinois, those are going to be on high alert. There's going to be a swath, a definite swath there, likely 4 to 6 inches, possibly even more if you combine the 24-hour totals. But extending where that enhanced risk, you still could get some elevated 1 to 3 inches of rainfall, and all those areas of green could at least pick up likely of an inch of rainfall just over the next 24 hours. So it's going to be pretty bumpy for your Sunday, unfortunately. But it doesn't end there because that continues to move across. We have a deepening low pressure again, 993 millibar low pressure. Now it's going to be shifting, continue to shift northeast, impacting areas into Michigan, back into Ohio, getting back into areas of Kentucky into the overnight hours with that flash flooding threat, shifting further south by then into areas of central and western Tennessee, and then eventually swinging as far south as into Arkansas. But going into your Monday, this is your Memorial weekend. Most of the activities shifting out across the Central Plains, pretty dry across the middle part of the country. The only convective complex in town is going to be highlighted across the East Coast, and some of those could be pretty bumpy. It's not as intense as what we saw last night, and of course what we're going to be seeing today. But nonetheless, some of these could be some stronger wind producers, borderline 60-mile-per-hour winds at times. They could have some mixed bag of pocket change hail, some quarter-size hail mixed in with those stronger thunderstorms back into Mississippi, as well as into Georgia, getting into Alabama. And there's another pocket of energy further north, closer to the low-pressure center, highlighted across D.C., back into the Delaware region, into New Jersey. Those areas have to be on high alert for that convective complex into your Monday afternoon time frame. But you can take a look at the surface map and kind of what it looks like with that low pressure center continue to try to wind itself down. It's not really going to go anywhere. It's just going to fan out and expand in coverage. When it does that, it will be weakening the storms somewhat, like I showed you, but it's still going to put out a swath of heavy rain, mainly draped across those eastern seaboards, and getting those areas across portions of the mid-Atlantic, getting with that renewed severe weather threat, getting some 60, likely some 65-mile-per-hour winds, and some of that quarter-size hail activity up there. And they are going to be dealing with a lot of higher winds, just what you've seen with this very active low-level jet that comes in. Yeah, these winds are going to be and not as intense as what we've seen, because we've seen a lot of intense storms as of late. But nonetheless, these still could produce anywhere from 50, 60, 70, maybe even some isolated 80-mile-per-hour wind gusts. I don't really see anything more than that unless it's actually a tornado. But these are going to be straight line winds with these mesoscale convective complexes where they tend to kind of bow out in nature. Those are always the ones that kind of pick up the wind barometer and for them. But overall, the next 48 hours, this is what it kind of looks like on the rainfall department. This is why we do have that slight and moderate risk for excessive rainfall, really highlighted across much of the upper Midwest, the mid-Atlantic, and much of the Northeast, with kind of a bullseye, if you will. That's why we do have the moderate risk for excessive rainfall. And you can look at the chart here. That's easily 4 to 6 inches of rain. Some areas could pick up 8 inches of rain. That's why we have likely some extensive flash flooding, and this could be kind of an overnight setup tonight. So definitely be on high alert. Do not cross a road that you cannot see the bottom, but still get some fairly decent amounts of a good 1 to 2, even upwards to 3-inch swath across a good part of the Great Lakes, much of the mid-Atlantic, as well as into the Northeast, getting further south along the East Coast as well. So you still could pick up some heavier rains over the next 48 hours, but really doesn't stop there. So there's the cool front that kind of cleared the atmosphere out, right? So that pushes all the way to the coast. That's on Monday. But by Tuesday, unfortunately, yes, we're talking that back up as a warm front. So whenever it backs up as a warm front, that opens the Gulf of Mexico again, and that produces more rain where they actually don't need it. They've been getting a ton of it down there in Texas and much of Oklahoma. Again, with another complex with that warm front lifting, that's going to put some instability back into play, and definitely some heavier rain back into play for those areas across a good part of Texas, as well as into Oklahoma, getting into Mississippi, and Louisiana again, back into Arkansas, where you see the yellow shaded areas. This is just on your Tuesday time frame, likely another 1 to 2 inches of rain. And where you see the green, likely another inch or two as we look at that convective complex with that convergence shifting out of the Gulf of Mexico. You've got the south wind that's just going to pull up the Gulf moisture, and the warm front is going to gravitate those higher dew points back into play. And that soupy air mass again, it really doesn't take much in the month of May to produce and squeeze out those heavier rainfall totals. And some of those actually could turn severe as well, closer to that dry line setup. There's the low pressure that still continue to be winding itself down from the Sunday and Monday storms. This is what it looks like by Tuesday. Most of the activity is going to be shifting off into Canada. Only extreme portion of the upper Northeast will be into the action. Going into Wednesday, that's where we got to be concerned. A little bit more probably widespread activity as the dry line will likely get active again, kind of blowing up across those same areas across western Nebraska, Kansas again, western Oklahoma, western Texas. That puts more instability in play, and especially when you start looking at the lightning strikes kind of line up again across that boundary, really extending all the way to the Canadian border, all the way to Texas. That whole line could be lit up again, so we could have another Southern Plains setup, Central Plains setup right in the heart of the middle of the country with more severe storms heading into your Wednesday timeframe. And looking at the latest CFS V2 guidance, yes, extremely concerning that it puts these elevated numbers and higher instability back into play for your last month of May. So these areas have just been inundated. It's been an extremely busy April and it's been an extremely busy May. And it definitely looks like it's going to end as an extremely busy May with more instability coming back into Texas, much of Oklahoma, as well as into Kansas again, as well as into Missouri, getting into Arkansas, and this pulls all the way through that June 1st timeframe. So it looks to continue to remain active. And if we look at the overall ensemble guidance and where the higher precipitation totals and the more instability would likely be, here's the overall European ensembles for the next 10 days, folks. So yeah, everywhere you see green, this is already your wettest month of the out of the 12 months. So whenever you see the green, that's above average on top of that. So that's definitely a wet period across a good part of the southern central plains, much of the Ohio Valley, and getting into portions of the Northeast. That's on the overall ensemble European guidance. And the GFS is even printing a wetter picture across a good part of the same areas. This is the overall ensembles over the next 10 days. So you see these areas continue to remain very active, very volatile for extensive rain and extensive severe storms across this region. And it's going to be on almost on a daily basis as we continue to end May and going into that first part of June. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you do like this video. Definitely hit the subscribe button and catch me next update. Why I protect you for and after the storm.